In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. So back during the summer, I sort of told y'all that I am not the kind of priest who writes a sermon and then tears it up in the middle of the week based on something that happened during the week, major events that go on. And I don't know if you know this, but some major events went on this past week. I'm not sure if everybody's paying attention. So I don't tear up my sermons and start over or anything like that. However, I do realize that when we come to church on Sunday morning, we are coming hoping to make sense of kind of our whole lives and what happens in our whole lives. So I don't want to just get up here and pretend like an election didn't happen, but I want to say just a quick word about it. All Saints is a very interesting place. It's a really incredible place in many ways. Sociologists have talked about what they call the big sort for a while now. I don't know if y'all have heard of this idea, but it is the idea that Americans have tried in the past few decades, as hard as we can, to live and work and play with people who are as much like us as is humanly possible. People who look like we do and think like we do, who have the same educational background that we do, and of course, people who vote like we do. This includes churches. Churches tend, like so much of the rest of our culture, to be red or blue, but we are not. We are purple at All Saints. We're a purple church. Some of us come here this morning and we are elated about the events of this past week. And some of us come here this morning and we are devastated about the events of this week. I think all of us come here this morning just really happy that we can watch our terrible football team play without having to endure more political advertisements in the middle of it. So we are united by that. Truly, we are all over the place in this community. So just a word to us in this community. Be gentle with each other in the days to come. Pray for this country that we love every single day. Pray for those who lead us and pray for those who are preparing to lead us. And remember this, the world around us is hungry for the good news of God's grace for actual people like us. That is true, however, that those people might have voted on Tuesday. It is true, however, you might have voted on Tuesday. Our hope, Christian hope, is not based on the results of any election. And our unity, the way that we love and care for one another, especially in the midst of the divisions all around us, is among the chief ways that we will show forth the glory of God in this world. Which does kind of bring us around to today's gospel. Because the Gospels are written in a world, believe it or not, of imperfect systems where God's people have a chance to succeed or to fail at showing forth God's presence in the world. This is one of those Gospels that seems really, really obvious. There are the bad guys, that's the scribes, and you might remember, they like to go along in their long, flowing robes, sitting in the good seats in the synagogue. This always makes me a little bit nervous whenever we get to this gospel. Then there's that's bad guys, right? And there's the good guy, which is this widow who gives everything she has. And the message is supposed to be like her, not like them, the end. But I think that version of the story misses a bit. So key to understanding any Bible story is understanding the context of the story. And for Mark, for the gospel according to Mark, the very best way that you can get the context of the stories is actually to sit down and read the whole thing in one sitting. So I would encourage all of you to do that one day. Maybe you get an extra pious urge. That is how you can scratch that itch. Because Mark is pretty short, and Mark is pretty full of adventure and full of action. It keeps moving. It's very readable. Most people can read the whole thing in an hour or two. So you could do that. But besides doing that, we're not going to do that this morning, don't worry. One easy way to get the context of a story is just to read the section before what you just read and then read the section after what you just read. Mark likes to make these sort of story sandwiches. It's a very technical theological term. These story sandwiches where he makes a point using 2 or 3 kind of interwoven stories. And the way we read the scriptures on Sunday by Sunday is we read it as a lectionary. And so often what we do is we go in, those things that Mark joins together, we kind of pry apart and read little bits of, which is what we've done this morning. But when we put them back together, it can really help us understand everything that's going on. So if you will indulge me, I want to look at the context of today's gospel. The story that came before and the story that comes after. Begins with a series of arguments. Jesus has these arguments with other religious leaders of his day, and they take place over the last chapter or so. And the final argument is with the scribes. And it's there that we get today's warning about them. Watch out because of the long robes and all. But notice the next part of his criticism. He says that you got to watch out for the scribes because they devour widows' houses. It's an interesting phrase, considering what comes next when we are face to face with a real-life widow who is giving, Jesus says, everything she had to live on. And notice what's not said. Jesus doesn't explicitly praise the widow. He doesn't say, look at how faithful she is, or something like that. He doesn't even say that she's doing the right thing. He just remarks what's going on. She is giving everything she has to live on. That's just the fact of the matter. And then right after this section, so after what we read this morning, Jesus makes a startling prediction. He says the temple structures, the temple itself, will be destroyed. Now, it's kind of an easy prediction for Mark to record because when Mark's gospel was written, it was either right before the temple was destroyed or it may have been right after the temple was destroyed, but either way, the writing was on the wall. It was going to happen. So do you hear how that complicates things a little bit in this story? The widow has given everything she has to live on to support a system that is soon going to be destroyed, while the scribes dance around in their fancy robes. I'm going to get back to the widow's action in a minute because I do think there's a lot we can learn from her. But for now, it's enough to say that it seems like much more than praising this widow, Jesus is actually criticizing the wealthy, the powerful, those who hoard what they have while exploiting the least, the poor, the widow. So I want to point out, this was not a problem of Judaism. That wasn't the action of every religious leader of Jesus' day, but it does seem to have been true of the powerful leaders associated with the temple. And here, Jesus is criticizing pretty clearly their actions. Jesus is attacking the way that their system has subverted the true heart of their faith. The religion was meant to have safeguards against exploiting the poor. The religion was designed to have mechanisms for helping those most in need. But in this instance, Jesus sees just the opposite at work. It could all look so different. If the scribes saw their duty to the widow, she wouldn't need to sacrifice all she had to live on, because there is enough. There is always plenty. This was true in the culture of the first century temple, and it is true in the church today. The church must be a community of plenty, a community that knows there's enough to care for one another, a community that is joyful in reaching out to one another. We do that kind of work here, All Saints. Today, in just a couple of minutes, we're going to bless these groceries. We're going to send them out to our friends at UCOM. And we have a number of members who are active in the life and work of UCOM on a week-to-week basis. Just last night, a number of us were able to go and celebrate with UCOM and to recognize the work that Rick and Renee Johnston have done there. Their incredible service to that organization made us all so very proud of what you do for them. Thank you. And it's just not UCOM, though. I see that kind of action, that kind of work in this community all over the place. This week, Mark Thalling had a rough go of it. Some of you have heard that story. Most of you know that Mark keeps us very well fed through his work in the kitchen and coordinating our various groups there. And while Mark was going through it this week, I was amazed as the men of All Saints stepped up to take care of Mark and his family and also the kitchen and our bellies. This week I met with some of the daughters of the King and a few others, and we planned an Advent service of healing, because Advent, the holiday season, is wonderful and beautiful and joyful. It's also really hard and really sad. And so sometimes we feel like we need to come for healing. And so I was there with them, and we planned, how can we have this service for members of our community who need a sense of healing in the midst of the joy and the craziness that unfolds that time of year. We care for one another here. We care for those in need, and we do not do so because we think our salvation lies in that kind of thing, but because we know that there is a joy in serving one another. There is a joy in unity with one another. There is a joy in freeing the widows around us, and here, widow in the first century had a different meaning really than it does. I'm talking about anyone who cannot really care for themselves. There is a joy in freeing those kind of folks from feeling like it all depends on them. But I want to be clear here. I don't think Jesus is criticizing the widow. He does point to her out to his disciples and lifts her up as a little bit of an example. And I think this has to do with her whole approach to giving. She understands something that is easy to forget, which is that giving is about a whole life. We often like to do with our resources like we like to do with so much of our lives, which is we divide them up into neat little categories. This is my life at work, and this is my life with my friends and my family, and this is my life of faith, and then we try to keep all that stuff as separate as we possibly can. And life does not work that way. And our resources, our time and our talent and our treasure, they don't work that way either. This woman, this widow, knows something that's true, which is that all of it, all of our life, is already in God's hands. It already belongs to God. Our days, our energy, our passions, our money, all of it is God's. All of it belongs to God. Our choice then is not to decide which percentage of our income, our life, our energy, we're going to go ahead and give to God. It's about whether we understand that every single bit of it already belongs to God. Some of those resources, I hope, will be given to the work and the life and the worship and the ministry of All Saints Church. Some of those resources, I trust and I hope, are going to go other places that do other really good work in the world, and you should give to those places as well. But some of the resources you give to God, some of your energy is going to go to your work, your occupation. That belongs to God too. Offer that to God too. God's not like done with you when you clock in at your job. Offer it to God. Some of your talents are going to go to helping your friend or your neighbor with some task that they need help with. Offer that work to God. Some of your resources are going to go because a friend of yours is in need and needs a gift. And that can be a gift made to God as well. What I'm trying to say is that with every choice you make about any resource you have, whether it is finances or everything else, you have the opportunity to learn from this widow. Every choice you make with any resource you have, your whole life can be offered to the glory of God and the good of the world around you. And that is the sort of people that we are called to be. That is the sort of church we are called to be. People who freely, joyfully offer not some percentage, not some limited amount, but everything we are and everything we have to the good of this world, to the love of our neighbors, to the worship of the church, and to the glory of God Almighty.